AMD reported quarterly financial results that disappointed stock market investors. The stock is down over 5.5% in the aftermarket hours after the company announced its quarterly earnings results. Of course, I'm disappointed about that. I've had AMD rated as one of my top stocks to buy here in 2025. So to see the stock price decrease is a disappointment to be sure. But in this video, I'm going to answer the question if this dip is a buying opportunity for AMD stock investors. I'm going to review the company's latest quarterly results, highlight what investors were disappointed with, and update my recommendation for AMD stock, let you know if I still think it's one of my top stocks. It's one of my top rated stocks to buy right now. I want to thank the Motley Fool for sponsoring this video. Visit fool.com/parkev for the 10 best stocks to buy now. So as I highlighted in the introduction, AMD stock price taking a decrease of about 5.5%, following an increase during the day, regular trading hours at 4.5%. It's given up all of those gains and has lost about 1.5% on top of that. The shares are still volatile, as you can see the price action while I'm recording this video. So AMD's management team said that 2024 was a transformative year as we delivered record annual revenue and strong earnings growth. Data center segment annual revenue nearly doubled as EPYC processor adoption accelerated, and we delivered more than $5 billion of AMD Instinct Accelerator revenue. Looking into 2025, we see clear opportunities for continued growth, and we are investing aggressively in artificial intelligence. So this sounds like a good year. And in fact, I think 2024 was a good year for AMD. But the problem is that AMD is getting compared with NVIDIA and on the other side, Intel. And for one, AMD is getting punished for not performing as well as NVIDIA is performing. And then number two, AMD is getting punished for being in the same markets as Intel. And investors are afraid that AMD can become like Intel. And so it's getting the worst of both comparisons against NVIDIA and against Intel, even though AMD is performing relatively well against Intel in terms of gaining market share, revenue, and participation in the AI market, which Intel is struggling, right? The data center segment revenue, AMD said that they delivered more than $5 billion in accelerator revenue. Intel didn't even do 500 million. And so the outperformance here is significant when you compare it with Intel. But then when you compare it with NVIDIA, there's that similar kind of underperformance. And that's kind of the give and take here with AMD stock. So in the latest quarter, revenue was up 24% year over year to 7.6 billion, and operating income was up 155% to 871 million. Operating margin expanded to 11% from 6%. So again, a good quarter, a good year. It's just when you compare it with NVIDIA, it's disappointing, right? AMD's operating margin of 11% is compared to NVIDIA's operating margin, which is close to 60%, 6 times that. And so when you compare it against NVIDIA, it looks really bad. But when you just look at it on its own, 24% revenue increase with 155% increase in operating income, that's a really good quarter for a company. And it's a quarter that investors should be pleased with in and of itself. It's just when you compare is when it looks poor. All right, AMD's data center segment revenue in the quarter was a record 3.9 billion, which was up 69% year over year, primarily driven by the strong ramp of its Instinct GPU and growth in its EPYC CPU. Here's one area of disappointment from investors. Pay attention to the growth rate here in the latest quarter, which was 69%, compared with the full year for 2024 in the data center segment, which was an increase of 94%. So what this means is that the latest quarterly revenue was a deceleration from earlier in the year. So the rate of increase is slowing down, which is not what investors were expecting, because AMD only recently launched these GPUs and CPUs for the data center, and investors were expecting a continued acceleration of growth for AMD, given that the data center segment, the market overall is rising rapidly. Businesses are spending so much money in this category. NVIDIA is experiencing so much growth in this category. And recently I've just recently reviewed three of the largest tech companies, Meta Platforms, Alphabet, and Microsoft, which all indicated huge increases in spending in the data center optimized for AI. They all indicated huge 50, 60% increases, which translates to $30 billion, $25 billion, respectfully, with Microsoft and Alphabet in terms of increases, not the total. The total budget is much larger. The total budget for Alphabet in 2025 is $75 billion for capital expenditures. For Microsoft, it's $80 billion for capital expenditures. That's up from $50 billion respectively for both of them. And so that's the kind of growth the market is experiencing. And investors were hoping that AMD would be growing at a much faster rate than the increase in the market, because they were hoping that AMD would gain some market share from NVIDIA, which boasts a market share of anywhere between 80 and 92%, depending on the analyst that's estimating those market shares. And so investors are hoping AMD can take some market share and grow a little bit faster than it did in the most recent quarter. That's what's driving that disappointment. That's what's driving the decrease in its client segment. Revenue also did well, was up 58% year over year, driven by the AMD Ryzen processors, again gaining market share against Intel in the CPU space, but losing market share or not gaining very much market share against NVIDIA in the most important segment right now that investors are watching, which is the data center optimized for AI. AMD also reported a huge increase in cash flow from operations, up to $1.3 billion. That was up from $381 million in the same quarter last year. And for the full year, cash flow from operations jumped to $3 billion, up from $1.667 billion the year prior. So solid increases throughout for AMD, the overall business improving, cash flows increasing, profits increasing, revenue increasing. Solid numbers, to be sure, but the improvement is slower than expected, which is what is giving investors indigestion with AMD stock. Is they want everything to happen like yesterday. They're not waiting for AMD, giving it time to catch up, giving it time to develop its technology, to develop the ecosystem, the software, along with the hardware for the data center optimized for AI. So AMD stock is now trading at a forward price to earnings of 17.5, which is near the lowest it has traded for in a year. My discounted cash flow model for AMD stock suggests that it's worth $180 a share, but it's currently trading at $109 a share. So the stock price is significantly lower than my calculation for intrinsic value for AMD. So to answer the question I posed in the beginning of the headline, is this a buying opportunity for AMD stock? I would say yes. Yes, it is. Hey everyone, I'm excited to announce that my book is finally available for sale. I've been working on it for more than a year now, so I'm really excited to finally share this with you now. It goes through my framework for evaluating stocks. Some of you often ask why I like this stock or why I like the other stock, and this framework provides you the things that I look at when I'm evaluating stocks. I've added the link in the description below.